The altar's shadow. The sun hung low over the small Nigerian village of Umuocha, casting long shadows across the red earth. The air was thick with the scent of burning palm fronds and the distant hum of cicadas. It was a place where time seemed to move slower, where the rhythms of life were dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. But on this particular evening, the village was anything but peaceful. News had spread like wildfire. Pastor Ezekiel Nonko, the beloved shepherd of the community, was dead. His body had been found in the early hours of the morning, slumped over the altar of the small church he had built with his own hands. The official report claimed it was a heart attack, but whispers of foul play had already begun to circulate. The pastor had been a pillar of the community, a man of God who had dedicated his life to serving others. His death was not just a tragedy, it was a mystery. In Lagos, Adaeze Nonko sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the text message on her phone. It was from her cousin, Chidi, and it was brief: "Pastor is dead. Come home." Her fingers trembled as she read the words over and over. She hadn't spoken to her father in years, not since she left Umuocha to pursue a life of her own in the city. Their relationship had been strained, to say the least, but the news of his death hit her like a punch to the gut. She packed a bag that night and boarded a bus to the village the next morning. The journey was long and uncomfortable, the bus rattling along potholed roads as the landscape shifted from the bustling chaos of Lagos to the quiet greenery of the countryside. Adaeze stared out the window, her mind racing. She hadn't been back to Umuocha since she was a teenager, and the thought of returning filled her with a mix of dread and curiosity. What would she find there? What secrets had her father taken to his grave? When she finally arrived, the village was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of children playing and women gossiping at the market were absent, replaced by a somber stillness. Adaeze made her way to the family compound, where she was greeted by her aunt, Mama Ngozi. The older woman embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Adaeze, you've come," Mama Ngozi said, her voice trembling. "Your father, he's gone." Adaeze nodded, her throat tight. "I know. I came as soon as I heard." The compound was filled with relatives and church members, all gathered to mourn the pastor's passing. Adaeze recognized some of them, but many were strangers to her. She felt out of place, like an outsider in her own home. As she moved through the crowd, she caught snippets of conversation, whispers about her father's death, about the circumstances surrounding it. Some spoke of a curse, others of betrayal. But no one seemed to know the truth. That evening, Adaeze sat with Mama Ngozi in the dimly lit parlor. The older woman handed her a cup of tea and sighed heavily. "Your father was a good man," Mama Ngozi said. "But he had his secrets." Adaeze frowned. "What do you mean?" Mama Ngozi hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There were rumors about money. Church funds that went missing. And there was a woman. A young woman from the village. People talked." Adaeze's heart sank. She had always known her father was far from perfect, but the idea that he might have been involved in something scandalous was hard to swallow. She decided to dig deeper, to uncover the truth about what had really happened to him. The next morning, Adaeze visited the church. It was a modest building, its white walls now stained with age and weather. Inside, the air was cool and still, the only sound the soft creak of the wooden pews as she walked down the aisle. She approached the altar, where her father's body had been found. The police had already cleared the scene, but Adaeze couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she examined the area, she noticed a small, crumpled piece of paper tucked beneath the altar. She picked it up and unfolded it, her eyes scanning the hastily scrawled words, "Meet me tonight. We need to talk. E." The note was unsigned, but Adaeze recognized her father's handwriting. Her heart raced. Who had he been planning to meet? And what had they talked about? That night, Adaeze decided to stake out the church. She hid in the shadows, her eyes fixed on the altar. Hours passed, and just as she was about to give up, she heard the soft creak of the door opening. A figure slipped inside, their face obscured by the darkness. Adaeze held her breath as the person approached the altar. Pastor Nwankwo, the figure whispered. Are you here? Adaeze stepped out of the shadows, her heart pounding. Who are you? The figure gasped and turned to run, but Adaeze was faster. She grabbed their arm and pulled them into the light. It was a young woman, no older than 20, her eyes wide with fear. Please, the woman begged. Don't hurt me. I'm not going to hurt you, Adaeze said gently. But I need to know what's going on. Why were you meeting my father? The woman hesitated, then sighed. My name is Nneka. I was having an affair with your father. Adaeze's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stay calm. Go on. He was going to leave the church, Nneka continued. He said he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. He was going to confess everything, the affair, the missing money. But someone found out. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. Adaeze's mind raced. Who? Nneka shook her head. I don't know. But I think they killed him. Adaeze felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. Her father's death was no accident. He had been murdered, and the killer was still out there. She knew she had to find out who it was, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Adaeze began to piece together the puzzle. She spoke to members of the congregation, to her father's friends and enemies. The more she learned, the clearer the picture became. Her father had been involved in a web of deceit, illicit affairs, embezzled funds, and a bitter rivalry with another pastor in the neighboring village. Pastor Samuel Okeke was a charismatic and ambitious man who had long envied Pastor Nwankwo's success. The two had clashed repeatedly over the years, their rivalry escalating into a full-blown feud. Adaeze began to suspect that Pastor Okeke had something to do with her father's death. One evening, Adaeze confronted Pastor Okeke at his church. The man was tall and imposing, his eyes cold and calculating. He greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Adaeze Nwankwo, he said. What brings you here? I want to know what happened to my father, Adaeze said, her voice steady. I think you know something. Pastor Okeke's smile faded. Your father was a good man, but he had his flaws. He made enemies. That's all I can say. Adaeze stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. Did you kill him? Pastor Okeke's expression darkened. Be careful with your accusations, girl. You don't know what you're dealing with. Adaeze didn't back down. I know enough. And I'm not going to stop until I find out the truth. Pastor Okeke's face twisted with anger. He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. You're playing a dangerous game. Leave it alone, or you'll regret it. Adaeze wrenched her arm free and took a step back. I'm not afraid of you. Pastor Okeke's eyes burned with hatred. You should be. Adaeze left the church, her heart pounding. She knew she was getting close to the truth, but she also knew she was in danger. She needed proof, something concrete that would expose Pastor Okeke's crimes. That night, Adaeze returned to her father's church. She searched through his office, looking for anything that might help her. As she rifled through his desk, she found a hidden compartment containing a stack of documents. They were financial records, detailing the embezzlement of church funds. But there was something else, a letter, written by her father, addressed to the police. In the letter, Pastor Nwankwo confessed to his crimes and named Pastor Okeke as his accomplice. He had planned to turn himself in, but someone had gotten to him first. Adaeze's hands trembled as she read the words. She had the proof she needed. The next morning, Adaeze went to the police. She handed over the document and the letter, explaining everything she had uncovered. The officers were hesitant at first, but the evidence was too damning to ignore. They launched an investigation, and within days, Pastor Okeke was arrested. The village was in shock. The man they had once revered as a spiritual leader was now exposed as a fraud and a murderer. Adaeze felt a sense of relief, but also a deep sadness. Her father's legacy was tarnished, but at least the truth had come to light. As she prepared to leave Umuocha, Adaeze visited her father's grave one last time. She knelt in the dirt, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered. "I wish things could have been different. But I hope you can rest now." She stood and walked away, leaving the village behind. The shadows of the past still lingered, but for the first time in years, Adaeze felt a sense of peace. She had uncovered the truth, and in doing so, she had found closure. The altar's shadow had been lifted, and she was finally free. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos.